Welcome to a special edition live football and other F words. Not a lot to talk about today, Mike. It's going to be a pretty easy show. Don't really know why we went live. No big breaking news, just the same old Tuesday, but we just like
Here to
go live.
preview the Jags.
Yeah, this is going to be completely Jag-centric. We're not going to talk about anything else other than our sponsors, Jaspers in Nashville, 2-for-1 on Sundays. I'm sure that a recently fired GM is going to be looking for a place to drink his sorrows away. Go to Jaspers. Maybe they're hiring for a general manager. I don't know. But Jaspers in Nashville is the place to work and the place to eat and drink. And let me tell you this. I know we have a lot of crossover from University of Tennessee fans into the Tennessee Titans realm, and we're a Tennessee Titan-centric podcast. But let me give you UT fans a little tidbit. Jaspers is in a Clemson alumni watch party headquarters. UT plays Clemson in the Orange Bowl. Get your ass there and give them some shit. Clemson and Ohio State are two of my least favorite teams outside of the SEC. So I kind of, I'll root for whatever team they're playing, even if it's SEC-centric. So head down to Jaspers during the Orange Bowl. Get you some great beer. They'll have the game on the big projection screen, and probably on every TV in the place. And they have tons of TVs. So head to Jaspers, enjoy a nice cold beer, send us a picture, tag Jaspers Nashville, West End. Oh my gosh, Mike. I don't know where to start because we recorded a podcast yesterday, full disclosure. We recorded a podcast yesterday. We both pretty much said, because we were talking about all these, crazy takes and all this stuff. And one of the things that we talked about, though, was the job that Jon Robinson has done and the job that Jon Robinson should have the chance to do in the future. And we had talked about the fact that he built the offensive line to a great point once before. He let it get out of control, couldn't fill holes as they were going, but he should get the chance to do it again. And then today I'm driving, going to look at a house. For those that don't know, I'm a real estate agent, and I was going out to Ashland City over near Kingston Springs and area and look at some houses. Yeah, it's a really nice area. It's my first time up there. Yeah. And newest development and everything. So Zach Lyons at kw.com if you want to email me or just reach out to me on Twitter if you need a real estate agent in Middle Tennessee. The Titans fired general manager Jon Robinson. I almost ran off the road. I texted you, and then I called you because you didn't answer my text. I said, we're going to have to re-record, and we're going to have to do this live because the official statement from the Tennessee Titans, since becoming controlling owner in 2015, my goal has been to raise the standard for what is expected in all facets of our organization. I believe we have made significant progress both on and off the field through investments in leadership, personnel, and new ideas. This progress includes the core of our business, the football team itself, which is regularly evaluated both by results, wins and losses, and team construction / roster building. I'm proud of what we have accomplished in my 8 seasons of ownership, but I believe there is more to be done and higher aspirations to be met. I want to thank Jon for his dedicated work to set this organization on an upward trajectory, and I wish him and his family the best. Amay Adams Strunk. I know I've talked a lot so far, Mike, and I haven't let you talk at all, but I'm going to get there. First, if you're watching and you're on YouTube, Facebook, I don't think Twitter has fixed the thing where you can comment on these videos, but we'll get to your questions. We'll get to your comments if you want to drop them in because it's our first time doing it live. So get them in there. Put them in there in the comment section. The other thing is, Mike, we also talked yesterday about the ridiculous notion that Amay Adams Strunk is a woman and has no place in football, because that's what people said, and running a football team, and that she was the reason that A.J. Brown could not get signed here because she is a broke-ass bitch, is what people would say. And we laughed at that notion. And now we laugh even more and even louder because Amay Adams Strunk is that owner. She knows what needs to happen to become a Super Bowl winning team. Jon Robinson did a great job turning this franchise around, but he has not done a great job maintaining the same trajectory, in her opinion. What were your initial reactions?
I mean, I was shocked, first of all, and immediately sad for the like multiple hours worth of Titans content that you and I and I'd also worked on for PK this week that was just thrown in the trash immediately. But I was shocked because I did think, and you and I discussed this on the pod that now no one will ever hear, that Jon Robinson had done a good job at fixing problems. When there were glaring problems, he generally was able to fix them. You know, you think about in 2016 when he took over, you know, he gets Ben Jones in, solidifies the offensive line, gets DeMarco Murray in. He made a lot of good moves to really help that team get off the mat. And then, of course, the pass rush just disappeared and the defense in 2020 slipped into oblivion. You know, he turned around the next year and immediately fixed the pass rush. He immediately fixed the defense. I figured he'd get the opportunity to do that with this offense, and particularly this offensive line, which is what we'd kind of talked about. But I guess, you know, there must have been some loss of confidence over, obviously, the 2020 offseason was brutal, absolutely terrible. The draft, the free agent class, all of it, just absolute disaster outside of, I guess, Danico Autry would be the one thing that they got out of that cycle that was any good. Or I guess that he was 2021, wasn't he?
Yeah.
Well, yeah, so they got nothing out of 2020, basically. But then you follow it up with 2021, another bad offseason, another bad draft, and then you followed up with trading AJ Brown. And look, like, I don't think the AJ Brown trade is the only reason that he is fired today, but I certainly think it has a lot to do with it, because it's hard for me to look at the timing of this firing, it happening right after the Eagles game, right after Amay Adams Strunk and her family had to sit in an owner's box with drunk, obnoxious, horrendous Eagles fans cussing at her and yelling at her and, you know, making fun of them for trading AJ Brown for 3 hours as her team was getting mopped on the field for, you know, 35-10. It's hard for me not to think that maybe that, you know, stuck in her craw a little bit more coming off of that game, coming off of that AJ Brown performance, with their offensive line continuing to look like a major issue that Jon Robinson just did not do enough to address. And that, you know, ultimately was the spot where his biggest misses were, you know, Isaiah Wilson and Dylan Radins and everything, you know. So it's hard for me not to tie some of that back directly to the AJ Brown thing. But I think, you know, we can go through the misses over the past, you know, especially 2 or 3 years. And it's not like he wasn't missing at all in 2016 and 2017, but there were more hits than misses during that stretch.
Well, there's also the hits that you have you didn't keep. Like that, I think that plays into it, is that you could technically say he started making less than desirable decisions, starting with letting Jack Conklin go. And granted, it is the right tackle position, but he has been scrambling ever since then to try to fill that right tackle position. And surprisingly enough, after he seemingly solves that issue, he gets fired and it's right here from Ike and Carnage. There's a potential that J. Rob has gone after drafting 4 quality starters this year too. It is wild, and I agree. I think it's a culmination of things, right? Because I think it's the culmination of never keeping your own players, really. The bulk of your draft classes seem to go. And I think that you saw his inability to adapt in COVID. I wrote about this back on September 23rd of this year for BroadwaySportsMedia.com. If you don't have an Insider Pass, get an Insider. But it was in an article called How to Easily Avoid Dumbassery. And in the section, I talked about scout better, build better. And one of the things this was shortly after Jon Robinson made comments that he just didn't adjust, and COVID really affected everybody, but it really affected them because he didn't really adapt to the situation. And that, to me, started throwing off red flags. Now, this was this year, but that, to me, threw up a little bit of red flags because I went back and I looked at Buffalo, Baltimore, San Francisco, Pittsburgh, Kansas City, Cincinnati, Indianapolis, LA Rams. Okay? Generally really good teams at drafting, or generally teams that are considered the top of the class as far as who they are in the NFL. Now, obviously, the LA Rams had a rough go of it. Pittsburgh is still struggling. But when you go back to the 2020 draft class, Buffalo has 6 of 7, 3 are starters. Baltimore 9 of 10, 5 are starters. San Francisco 5 of 5, 3 starters. Pittsburgh 3 of 6, 3 starters. Kansas City 5 of 6, 4 starters. Cincinnati 7 of 7, 3 starters. Indianapolis 6 of 9, 4 starters, and LA Rams 6 of 9, 3 starters. Now that 6 of 9 and all those numbers are they're on the roster. And you look at Jon Robinson, and it is 1 of 6 on the active roster, 1 starter and 2 guys that were cut and put on the practice squad, Larrell Murchison and Chris Jackson. And then you take into the 2021 draft class, Caleb Farley, Dylan Radins, Monty Rice, Des Fitzpatrick, Rashad Weaver, Racey McMath, Brady Breeze, and Elijah Molden. You got maybe 2 really good players out of that.
I'm not sure I'd say any really good players. I'd say Weaver is at least decent depth at this point, but that's really all he's proven to me. And then Molden, I mean, it's hard to say what Molden is right now, I mean,
there's not a lot of contributors, consistent contributors on the team. And I go back to that Eagles game, right? That Eagles loss, and we'll talk a little bit about it. But if you really want some overarching thoughts on the Eagles loss, you can watch a football show or go get that on a podcast with 440 Sports. Or you can listen to the Hot Read podcast. Easton also broke down that game extensively. But you go and look at that game, right? Dylan Radins was drafted, we thought, to be the left tackle of the future, or at least the right tackle, then maybe a left tackle, or tackle anything. And then who's getting beat every play? A guy that Jon Robinson traded a 5th-round draft pick for in Dennis Daly. Instead of trying to stick with Dylan Radins or trying to get something out of him, he immediately trades a 5th-round pick. So that's a 2nd and a 5th-round pick invested in the left tackle position. That is a wash. Okay? And then go look at what A.J. Brown did to us. Not only do you have the A.J. Brown trade that obviously pissed off Mike Vrabel, that I think I know I kind of just was like, I think it's just a reaction. I think he's just sad. I think even now look back on it, I think, he's angry, I think. And you see who's covering A.J. Brown. Well, that should have been Caleb Farley, right? And now look, this is not revisionist history. 95% of fans, football watching public, analysts thought the Caleb Farley pick was of good value. However, that doesn't fucking matter to the bottom line. Like, it really doesn't matter to the bottom line. Ultimately, you're judged on what happens, and what happens is while that may have been a good decision at the time, it did not pan out. Think about your job. If you went and promised and said, and your owner gave you a certain amount of money, and he said, listen, I need you to increase our bottom line, our profit, our end goal, and you spend the money and you make what you think are good decisions, but you ultimately fail and it does not increase the bottom line or the profit margin, you're fired, right? I mean, like, this is just like any other job. And here's how I ultimately feel about it. I am surprised it happened. I understand why it happened. And I'm both similarly terrified and excited at what happens next.
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of where I fall on it too. I think, some of the stuff, the Clowney signing, the Julio trade, those are major misses that he had. And now, to be fair, like 95 to 99% of this fan base was head over heels in love with both of those moves. It was, oh my God, we got Clowney. Oh my God, we got Julio. We're going to be unstoppable when those moves were made. So it is understandable why he made those moves. But at the end of the day, and I agreed with both those moves for what it's worth, but I agree that at the end of the day, what I think doesn't matter. And I'm not paid millions and millions of dollars to build an NFL roster. And Jon Robinson is, and he has to live with the results, whether they're good or bad. And I think on both of those situations, both the Clowney situation and the Julio situation, what happened was Jon Robinson put himself in a terrible negotiating situation because they had nobody as an edge rusher besides Harold Landry. And, they had signed Vic Beasley. But I think by that point, by the time they signed Clowney, they already knew Beasley, they weren't going to get anything out of him. So they put themselves in a terrible bind. In fact, I don't know if they signed Clowney, if Beasley actually shows up to camp and stuff like that and isn't just a total waste of space. Maybe they don't, feel the need to sign Clowney. which cost them $10 million, which then trickles downhill because that's $10 million of cap that would have flowed over into the next season. And that's $10 million you could have used to pay someone else, even if they couldn't use that money in that season for someone else because free agency was already over, whatever, by that point. But it all snowballs downhill. So that move, and then the Julio move, we talked about the whole offseason. Where's your other wide receiver? Because you let Corey Davis walk, and you can debate about whether they should
at
have.
the time. I mean, at the time, again, he got overpaid, and he's still considered overpaid.
Yeah, he is overpaid. He got a lot of money for a guy that's really no better than like a decent number 2. But you let Corey Davis walk, and then you never replaced him with anybody, right? Like we didn't know like who was going to be the wide receiver 2 on that team. We had no idea. And it almost felt like he got into a place where he had to do something, and that was the only viable option left on the table. And I think that it led to him getting fleeced in both situations, both by Clowney's agent, who got $10 million out of him. You know, who knows, maybe they could have gotten similar money out of the Saints or whoever else was in on Clowney at that point. But I definitely think they got fleeced by the Falcons, who knew Julio was damaged goods at that point and were managed to offload him for a second and a fourth. And the Titans took on that contract, and it made them restructure Ryan Tannehill's contract, which pushed all this dead cap money into the future, further hamstringing them this year and next year. So it's all just these kind of compounding effects of these bad decisions. And, you know, whether they were justifiable at the time, I think you can make an argument that I could always understand, at least for the most part, I could understand where Jon Robinson was coming from on most deals. But at the end of the day, like you said, this is a results-based business, and he was not getting results, and the offense was going the wrong direction. Like, that's what it comes down to. At the end of the day, they reached a new peak in 2019 and 2020 with this offense. They were, 10th in scoring in 2019, 4th in 2020. And then it just all slid right off, as they just didn't replace guys who left because, Corey Davis moves on. You didn't really replace him. Then Roger Saffold is cut. You didn't really replace him. You've got your right tackle situation. You never are able to replace Jack Conklin effectively at this point. Jonnu Smith leaves, and you never really replaced him until this year. It was just issue after issue that just lingered and festered, and it's ultimately his job to fix it. And I think Vrabel got more out of this group than he probably should have last year, and he's gotten more out of this group than he should have this year. There's a quote from a Bill Simmons podcast, which, Bill Simmons has obviously connections to New England sporting world, and a lot of people that know Vrabel are people that, Bill Simmons knows. There was a comment on one of his podcasts earlier this season. I think the Titans were, maybe like 5-2 or something like that. They'd gone on this little bit of a run and were suddenly, winning some games. And he was talking to Peter Schrager, and he said, from what I've heard, Vrabel's a little surprised that they're playing as well as they are right now this year, and that they weren't really expecting to compete at a high level, that this was always going to be a little bit of a reset season for them. I think Vrabel knew he was dealt a shit hand this season. I think he knew it when AJ was traded. I think he's known it all season. You had the weird quote to Ed Werder where Vrabel, Werder asked him about.
I forgot about that.
The sustainability of running.
Who the fuck are we going to throw it to?
And he said, "Well, it's not like we're going to throw the ball 50 times. Who the fuck would we throw it to anyway?" So there have been weird things trickling out from Vrabel that basically tell you he is not happy with the options that he has on his roster. I think the other one was, he had made a comment during one of the press conferences, and I can't remember which one it was, but he basically told the media, if you haven't figured it out yet, this is going to be the way that we have to play. That we don't have another way that we can go here. And to me, again, that is him saying for all the world to hear, I'm boxed in because I don't have the fucking personnel to do this. I don't have other options. We can't go throw the ball 40 times and spread the ball around the field because we can't block and we can't catch the ball. Like we don't have the people that we need to be able to go execute at the level that I know that we need to. So I think Vrabel had been, it's easy to dismiss some of those things as one-offs as they just slowly trickled out. But now with this, I kind of feel like Vrabel has been kind of sending out messages all season that he wasn't happy about the roster. And now it certainly looks like maybe he said, went to Amy at some point, or maybe Amy went to him and asked him, but he told Amy, look, I'm not getting enough help from Jon. This is not working. We don't have a roster to compete with the Chiefs and Bills and everyone else right now. And good on Amy to make this move. I mean, if she feels that way, good on her to go make this move. She's been bold before with firing Malarkey and installing Vrabel, and that worked out beautifully. We'll see if this works out the same way. It may not. But I like that she is not settling for okay, that she is wanting to push the envelope and continue to push until they reach, the summit here.
Well, I think the Stoney Keeley puts this out right at SoBrosNetwork.com. The trickle down effect killed him, and there's a lot more to it. But you pretty much said the same thing in what you were talking about, is that it was a trickle down effect. It's decisions that linger into multiple seasons, right? I mean, it's the not signing Jack Conklin in 2019. It just trickled, or after 2019, just trickled all the way down throughout the rest of the way. It's that ignoring the wide receiver position and, signing guys coming off ACL injury and only drafting guys that went to the Senior Bowl, right? I mean, like, that's another thing that it's one of the big things for me is that, oh, well, Jon Robinson isn't going to draft that guy because that guy didn't go to the Senior Bowl. It's why he drafted Des Fitzpatrick over Amon-Ra St. Brown's, because Des Fitzpatrick was at the Senior Bowl. That's not how to run.
Class that had those fingerprints all over it, because it was Radens, it was Rice, it was Dez, was Racy there? I can't remember.
I think so.
I'm pretty sure Weaver was there. But yeah, they went I think we looked at it at the time, and you and I talked about this after the fact. Right after that draft, that 6 of the 9 guys they drafted, or 6 of 8, or whatever it was, were Senior Bowl guys. And it was very clearly they just were like, all right, we're just going to pick these guys because we got to interact with them in person. And that's limiting your pool way too small in a situation.
And it's something that he's been known to do, right? I mean, that is the main place he pulls his players from. And it's kind of ridiculous. Sometimes it's worked, sometimes it hasn't. But I think the other thing is that what fans need to take away from this, at least this decision, is that everything you've been complaining about and the Titans have put it now in neon letters, and they're flashing it up there for everyone to see. They're not cheap. They have a great coach, and all the problems stem from Jon Robinson's GM decisions. What Mike Vrabel is telling you, whether you like it or not, is that Todd Downing is not the issue, and this is something that you've said the whole time, that he has been given shit to work with, and that shit came home to roost in an epic fashion now 4 times this year. 2 in major epic disasters versus the Bills and versus the Eagles. And then you look at the Giants and the Bengals, games that are close that they could have won if they had an offensive line, if they had weapons. Instead of signing an over-the-hill Robert Woods to technically be your wide receiver 1 after you trade away A.J. Brown, all coming off an ACL injury, you should have gone after other guys. And what we know about this team is that when Corey Davis was let go, and I'm not saying Kenny Golladay or Marvin Jones or some great wide receivers, they didn't even call those guys, according to people that are in the know. I think PK even said they were never in it for Kenny Golladay. They were never in it for Marvin Jones. But, man, they sure were in it for Josh Reynolds. Man, they're sure in it for Jeff Swain. Those decisions are Jon Robinson decisions, and that's what they're telling you.
And the Josh Reynolds thing, I think, is illuminating here, too, because they went out and got Josh Reynolds. And at the time, he was their wide receiver too, right? He was the guy that they signed before they ended up going to get Julio. But the way Vrabel treated him ultimately, it was clear Vrabel was not interested in Josh Reynolds, because Josh Reynolds got like zero opportunity to play here. And I feel like that was one of those moments where you could kind of see like the butting of the heads between
because
Jon
we were like,
Robinson
why
and,
isn't
and Vrabel.
Josh Reynolds getting playing time?
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean,
Now we know.
Yeah, now we know. I think it's because Vrabel just did not value him. And whether rightly or wrongly, like I think Josh Reynolds has actually played pretty well for the Lions. So, maybe that's one where Robinson was right and Vrabel was wrong. But either way, it doesn't really matter. And like and this kind of will fade into like the next portion of what we probably need to talk about here, which is what's next. And I think there's some good and some bad to the idea of a head coach being also in charge of, or at least having a very strong influence over personnel.
So let me ask you this. This is from a reader, S. Rob. Vrabel doesn't strike me as a big personnel scouting guy. To me, I put in Trace thing. But to me, I feel like I don't think he's a big scouting guy, but I think he's a big personnel guy.
I think so, yeah. Because I mean, like you see him go around to all these pro days and everything, and he's working out with these guys, and he always talks about how he likes to get his hands on guys. I think he loves working with guys. I don't know that he wants to sit down and scout players day after day, but I think he would enjoy being able to pick out the players that he is going to use. And that's why I think what we'll ultimately see, in my opinion, is Vrabel will have a lot of say over who the GM is, if he doesn't pick him outright himself. And then I wouldn't be surprised if we see the GM answer to Vrabel, right? Like I think you will have a general manager. I don't think Vrabel will be listed as the GM specifically, but I think you will have a general manager, but it will be a general manager that answers to Vrabel, which is similar to how I believe it's set up in San Francisco with Kyle Shanahan and John Lynch. Obviously, it didn't work out in Carolina, but with Matt Rule, I believe it was also set up that way, where the GM answered to the head coach, or the head coach had final say on personnel decisions, as well as who plays.
Well, if I'm not mistaken, I think that's how it works in Minnesota as well. When you talk about a quick turnaround up there, I believe it's I think a lot more of the new relationships between GM and head coach are a little bit more symbiotic than I kind of now get the feeling that it was here. Like, I kind of thought that this was a more symbiotic relationship. They were more in lockstep than what they were. I mean, they got extensions at the same time. Like, you thought that this was a closer relationship than what it was. And I agree with you. I think it's like you're looking at the GM is going to run the scouting department. He's going to run the player profiles. He's going to run the reports. And Mike Vrabel's going to go, okay, I need a run-stopping nose tackle. Who do you got that's coming out of college? Show me the tape. Show me your PowerPoint presentation. Let me read the file, the dossiers, and then he's going to pick which one he thinks is time to go. Like, I think that when it comes down to it, like Jeffrey Simmons, we haven't even talked about what Jeffrey Simmons has said in the offseason. I wonder if that doesn't play into a little bit of this, because you let A.J. Brown get traded and control negotiations and narratives. Now this is happening. Like, Mike Vrabel comes to the GM and says, hey, I need Jeffrey Simmons. You and Vin Marino, if Vin Marino's still around, get together, figure out how to make it happen. Come to me with a plan on how to make it happen. Let's get this thing done. Like, I think that's what his power is, a veto power and an assignment kind of power.
Yeah, and I kind of think, and I mentioned this, I don't know if it'll happen or not, but it would not shock me at all if they did something like just Vrabel puts John Stryker in as GM.
That would be fucking amazing. A drama on Twitter and media. That'd be amazing.
It would be amazing drama, but like the seeds have kind of been laid for this, because listen, there was a Rex Road article 2 years ago about Vrabel, and it goes into Stretch, as he's known, John Stryker, and he is technically, I think his title now is football development coordinator or something like that. which is kind of a nonsense title, but he is basically Mike Vrabel's right-hand man. In fact, during Mike Vrabel's Coach of the Year speech, which this was interesting, Mike Vrabel thanked, his family. He thanked Amay Adams Strunk. He did not thank Jon Robinson.
Oh, look at you.
He did thank John Stryker, who he called his best friend. And
Ryan Day with the knife twist and Luke Fickell with the knife
twist.
Yeah,
Luke Fickell. Eat shit, Luke. But no, it is he called Stryker his best friend and thanked him during his Coach of the Year speech. And also in the piece I was referencing from Rex Road, it talks about Stryker and his path kind of to Vrabel, who he's been with. He met him at Ohio State and was with Everett Withers, and then he followed Everett Withers to James Madison, and then he went to Texas State with him. But Everett Withers, who was on Ohio State staff with Stryker, with Vrabel, also with Shane Bowen, so obviously very connected in with this group, said to Rex Road in 2020, he said, you watch, Stretch is going to be an NFL GM someday. He is going to be a star in this league. And the Rex Road's commentary was that Stryker's hope is to eventually go to the personnel side. So
if you all are not watching YouTube right now, or if you're listening to this in the podcast form, you should see my face, because it is just, I can't believe that you remember this article from 2 years ago, first up. But secondly, this also ties into the article that was put out earlier this year about Vrabel. I don't remember who wrote it. I think it was one of the Connor Orr, one of the Monday Morning Quarterback guys or something like that.
Are you talking about the one that talked about Stryker again?
He talked about Stryker again, about how Vrabel plays the game and knows all the rules, and this is why
Mike Sando.
Mike Sando. Yep. But he was mentioning that too. And I'm thinking, okay, Ryan Cowden probably is not going to, stick around, but he's going to at least fill it in for now. And I also thought Monty Ossenfort could maybe he's Vrabel's guy, because you don't really hear Jon Robinson talk about Monty Ossenfort, but everybody in the NFL knows about him, right? Wants to interview him. So I thought maybe he's a surprise dark horse. But now I'm thinking it's going to be Stretch, right? Like, is it, if you're putting odds on it, like minus 250? Like,
here's the thing. If Vrabel is fully in control and Vrabel is dictating who this is, I think it's going to be Stryker, because, I mean, who would he trust more than Stryker? Who would know what he wants more than Stryker? And honestly, that's ultimately what he wants in that position, right? He just wants somebody who he trusts the judgment of, and that he knows that he can work with. So to me, there's no better person for Vrabel than putting Stryker in that spot and having somebody that he knows he likes, that he can work with, and that, frankly, he can control too. I mean, like, Stryker's not going to bow up to Vrabel, I can't imagine.
I don't know if you're friends. Maybe he's more comfortable with being challenged that way.
He may be more willing to speak his mind because he knows, like,
they're dove hunting or something. They're dove hunting, and he's like, "Oh, I was watching this guy, this quarterback," and Vrabel's like, "Nah, Tannehill's our guy." And he's like, "No, Tannehill's not our guy." And they shoot a dove, and they're clay shooting or whatever, drinking Busch Lights. That's what I imagine Vrabel does on his off time.
We may need to produce a buddy comedy featuring Vrabel and Stryker if he does get named GM, but. To me, like, that is a guy that makes a lot of sense to me. If it doesn't make a ton of sense for them to go out and, like, hire some outside GM. I don't know.
I would think that he would have a good connection with anybody that is good, right? Like, and here's the thing. Everybody that's worried about the next GM that comes in being a total bust, I think the opposite. I think the next GM is going to be in good hands, because you have Amay Adams Strunk, who, guess what, hired Jon Robinson, by the way. And then you now have Mike Vrabel's input. Obviously, this firing, I think Mike Vrabel has a plan. I think Mike Vrabel knows that, and Amay Adams Strunk knows, they have money, despite what people think. We're not spending the money correctly, and we got to fix that. And I think that if you're talking about a guy that's going to be on the road, that's going to be at the pro days, going to be doing Senior Bowl stuff, that's going to be doing that, Stretch was probably doing a majority of that anyway. And now Vrabel, because a lot of people are like, well, you can't do both, right? You can't be this and you can't be that because it takes up too much of your time. Well, now if you got basically Vrabel Jr. doing all the work, and then he brings you 3 or 4 players, you know that he eliminated players based on your all's conversations already. Like, you can trust that whoever he brings you are Vrabel guys if you're talking about drafting. Which brings me to my next question, and this comes from Colin Nixon in the YouTube chat. Curious to see how this move impacts the quarterback situation of the future. New GMs usually want to get their guy. Does Tannehill stick around? What happens to Willis? So this is a great question because I think that if you're thinking of Tannehill, I think Tannehill's both their guys, right? Like, do you get that sense, or do you think that Vrabel knows that, okay, Tannehill's contract sucks, we're going to trade for Tom Brady? Like, what do you think about that? Because that's now another new situation here that Vrabel and Tom Brady, Vrabel and Tannehill, because Tom Brady's getting the shit kicked out of him down in Tampa Bay. You know, what the quarterback situation is in flux. Now, the wide receiver group, the offensive line, all this stuff is like thrown out the window. I think everybody on the defense is safe except for Bud Dupree's contract and Zach Cunningham's contract. But you have to open up the possibility that Vrabel knows the limits of Ryan Tannehill and is going to look to upgrade, Tannehill is Vrabel and Stretch's guy, but Malik Willis isn't. Because like the Malik Willis thing is just so interesting now because he never really seemed to fit. I always thought they would have to change the entire offense for Malik Willis when they were drafted him or even in the pre-draft. He just never seemed to fit. And now this whole quarterback situation is in flux. So where do you land on this? I know we haven't had a lot of time to digest it, but where do you land on the Tom Brady possibility? Because maybe that also played into maybe a little bit of strife. Maybe Mike Vrabel, and I'm just pure conjecture, but maybe Mike Vrabel wanted Tom Brady over Ryan Tannehill. Remember, Mike Vrabel did FaceTime him and Julian Edelman, which could just be friends. And that's just a little conspiracy theory that I love. I love conspiracy theories. You know I do. I mean, so I'm just throwing it out there.
It's possible. I do think Vrabel loves Tannehill. And he's gone to bat.
That's where I land as well. I land on that side as well.
But I do think it'll be interesting because you're right. I mean, GMs do generally like to pick their own quarterback. Now it's interesting that Robinson really never picked out his quarterback, right? He inherited Mariota. He traded for Tannehill, but I am still 100% to this day convinced that when they traded for Tannehill, they traded for him because Mariota was always hurt, and they wanted a good backup. They wanted a top-end backup to give them some insurance because they knew they were going to have to play their backup quarterback a few games during the season. So I am not convinced at all that Robinson ever really chose or thought Tannehill was going to be the starter. Now, I guess you could say he chose him when he paid him. I think that's probably fair. But he never really got to draft that guy until Malik, which was really just a 3rd-round pick and probably still just, mostly a backup with upside. So it is interesting that he never really got that opportunity here. Now, 2 other GMs that I think are at least worth discussing. Rick Smith of the Texans, who was famously lost a power struggle with Bill O'Brien in 2017. But Rick Smith built that Texans team into what it really was, which was running the division. He lost a power struggle, I think, the year that Vrabel left, or the year before Vrabel left to come here. So he would have been the GM the whole time Vrabel was an assistant coach in Houston. I think he would be someone that you could potentially see as a candidate. And then Brian Gain is the guy that replaced him in Houston and was also an assistant in Houston.
He left to Rick Smith left in 2017 after the 2017 season. So there.
So right at the same time Vrabel left to come here. I think those would be the names that you would look to if you were going to look for an outside name. I don't think Rick Smith has been in football since he.
Yeah, according to Wikipedia, he has not. Maybe he's been waiting. Waiting for this.
Currently assistant GM for the Bills. So that could be someone you look at as a possibility. But either way, I still think it makes more sense that it is going to be Stryker or, maybe who knows what Vrabel's relationships are like with Cowden and or Austin Ford. If maybe one of those guys, would also.
I think Austin Fort's the one that's most likely associated with Vrabel. If I was going to
got
choose
the New
anybody,
England ties.
Yeah.
Yeah, Cowden came from the Panthers and didn't have any ties to Vrabel before he arrived.
And remember, Cowden was up there with Jon Robinson during a couple of press conferences and in the offseason. I have no clue what even Austin Fort looks like. I barely know what Cowden looks like. But
he's a bald guy.
But Austin Fort hasn't really been out on the forefront of anything other than when you see him randomly pop up for first interviews, second interviews, and you're like, why?
He was like when the Texans hired Caserio, or I guess when they tried to hire Caserio and failed the first time, Austin Fort was one of the names that was. I know he interviewed, but I want to say he was like a finalist for that job before they decided to give it to Pastor Jack and wait a year before they could get Caserio without tampering charges. So that is an interesting. I would imagine like one of those five people that we just named, though: Cowden, Austin Ford, Stryker, Rick Smith, or Brian Gaine. Like one of those. Yeah,
because I couldn't really think of anybody like from any kind of like college athletic directors that would be good for this. Like you got to think it's got to be someone that Vrabel is comfortable with, and you got to think that. It's Cowden right now, but it's probably just Cowden because he's the closest to Jon Robinson. And it's an easier transition to carry out for the last 5-6 weeks of the season. Yeah. And then they're going to pick up their search. And I think their search will include a few of these guys. Obviously, you have to, interview a few different GMs and outside sources and according to league rules and all that. And this Andrew King right here asked the question, you don't think there's any chance that Cowden stays the GM? I think there's a chance. I think it's the least likely of all the scenarios, in my opinion, because I think he is so close to Jon Robinson. You don't know how many of the decisions he had a hand in that Jon Robinson has done. We don't.
Yeah.
So they do.
And that's a really interesting topic here because that's the thing. Like, I saw some people say, well, oh, great. You got the second in command of the guy who chose Isaiah Wilson or whatever. Like, there's not 100% agreement on all of these decisions. So we don't know who was in favor of what. It could have been, Ryan Cowden was, 100% anti Isaiah Wilson, or maybe he was on board with it. I don't know that. I don't think anybody knows that unless you are in the building. And none of those people are going to tell you.
I think if at the end of the season they don't take him from interim and just take the title off, that means that he was a lot closer tied to Jon Robinson than we know, right?
And as Andrew brings up here too, he was getting GM interviews last offseason, and he's gotten them several off seasons now, but he hasn't been hired for one. And at some point after you've interviewed, because he's been up for like no less than 5 or 6 openings at this point.
Yeah, it's been 2 or 3 years. I think he's been getting interviews.
Yeah, like what is?
I know at least 2.
Yeah, you kind of wonder like, what is there an issue with him? The way he interviews or whatever. I don't know that there is. Maybe there were just better candidates or whatever, but nobody has chosen him yet, which is at least eyebrow raising to me.
Yeah. Well, you got to take that into account, right? There's a reason that, whatever you may think the reason is, there is a reason Eric Bieniemy has yet to be hired, right? Like either some people are bad interviews, some people have bad plans, but it doesn't prevent bad people from getting hired either, right? You look at Matt Rule got hired and, Adam Gase has been hired. It doesn't prevent bad people from getting hired, but there's always reasons why certain people are not hired. And you have to think that Ryan Cowden, being as young as he is, coming from really a good background of resume with the Tennessee Titans, that he would have been you would think that he would have been hired by now. Jon Robinson, and let's talk about what's next for the team. And the Jon Robinson being fired really fixes nothing for the 2022 season. Like what you got with the 2022, you're either listen, as much as I want him to, because I think it'd be funny, because I think it would be a great conspiracy theory that says that Amay Adams Strunk wanted them to be in on OBJ, and Jon Russell's like, no, we can't go in on OBJ, and that's why he got fired. Like, I want that conspiracy theory to be true, but they're not going to suddenly jump in the OBJ sweepstakes, right? In fact, it was just reported by Ed Werder that his physical, according to the Cowboys, who probably want him for cheap, did not come back very encouraging, right? And they're probably trying to also scare away.
He's still 8 months removed from ACL surgery. I mean,
I just think it's funny the team is leaking that, because you know that means that like they're trying to scare off the Bills, or they're trying to scare off the Giants, or trying to get them for cheaper, and it may be partly true. But they're suddenly not going to do that. They're not going to suddenly go out and sign Will Fuller, who's or Eric Flowers, who we kind of all have been hyping and wanting at this point. I think at this point they are stuck with what they got. Now, after the 2022 season, I think that you're going to see Bud Dupree gone. I think you're going to see Zach Cunningham gone. I think that Danico Autry will be brought back. I think that Ryan Tannehill will be brought back. And I kind of think, I don't know where I land on the Derrick Henry situation just quite yet. And I also think Taylor Lewan, I think, could be brought back now that Jon Robinson's gone. It's just,
I'm not sure if that makes it more or less likely.
Yeah, I'm not sure either. But I think that when you get down to it, this offseason is exciting. I don't care if it's Ryan Cowden, Stretch, Monty Austin-Fort, Rick Smith. This offseason is exciting because whoever the GM is coming into this team is still coming into a team that is good. This is not, whoever comes in for the Jacksonville Jaguars or the Texans or a bottom-feeding team. They get to come in, and I think what this should signal to everybody is that Amay Adams Strunk, because of her words, open checkbook season, right? Jeffrey Simmons is going to get paid. Hopefully Nate Davis gets paid and David Long gets paid. And yeah, they're all Jon Robinson draft picks, right? But we have seen Jon Robinson not sign his own draft picks when he needs to. We've seen him not negotiate. He didn't even talk to Corey Davis. Corey Davis was on the Raw room, if I'm not mistaken. And he basically said, they never even talked to us about numbers. They never even approached my agent about a deal.
That's pretty wild. And it's like, and it seems kind of crazy. Like I know Buck was reporting at the time that it seemed like they were close maybe to getting something. So I don't know what to believe on that necessarily. But either way, there have been missteps about, guys that have been brought back or not brought back. And it's definitely an interesting offseason now because it is.
Now we know nothing about this team, right? Like we don't know what Vrabel's going to look for, what this team's going to look for, what kind of players they draft. Like we joked about, but it's kind of true. If you're coming off an injury or you're a Senior Bowl player, you're a Tennessee Titan, right? Like you could pretty much bet money that they're going to select someone like that and also pay someone like that coming off the offseason. And I wonder if they're not going to be going big for, I think maybe a bunch of, $9 or $10 million contracts on defense, and they're going to go big to fix this offensive line fairly quickly. But, to me, I think it's about taking care of your own guys. And I think, Mike Vrabel preaches that a lot. He preaches about the guys in the locker room taking care of our guys. If they take care of us, they'll take care of you and blah, blah, blah. Like he builds these relationships with these players. And then Jon Robinson lets them go. Or Jon Robinson trades them. And to me, I think that is going to be the biggest overarching change is that a bunch of our guys are going to get signed that should get signed. You should bring back David Long. You should bring back Nate Davis. Reasonable contracts. You should bring back Jeffrey Simmons. You should try to convince, Ben Jones to stick around. You definitely bring back Danico Autry. You bring back these guys that have bought in. But what does this look like for free agency? Like, do players now, does this make a team more attractive that Mike Vrabel's in charge or has a little bit more player personnel control, or does it hurt? Like, it's the Tennessee Titans, but now it's Mike Vrabel's Tennessee Titans technically. Like, I feel like it's like the Mike Vrabel show featuring Mike Vrabel, and then also here the Tennessee Titans.
I mean, it will be interesting because I do think to some degree, I don't think it really will matter to the players, but I do think it'll matter to agents. And a lot of times, agents do form relationships with certain GMs or certain people in front offices because that's who they deal with, and that's and I don't know how strong Robinson's relationships are with agents or whether they're a team. I mean, it's really hard to know because people just don't talk about this stuff, right? Because I don't know if teams are, agents are excited about getting their guys to come to the Titans or trying to get their guys to come to the Titans because they like working with Jon Robinson and whatnot. I would think the fact that they have not gotten more extensions done than they have tells me that, maybe they don't necessarily try to direct their guys here, when they can. So all that stuff matters. It's impossible for me to like really say whether it would be better or worse with a new guy. I'm going to be interested in the timeline of the GM search because I think the firing happening now to me says we're about to ramp up college scouting. We want to get somebody in place as soon as possible so that we can have that person involved in the whole college scouting process from, right now is kind of when teams kind of like a little bit of a behind the scenes look at this. A lot of times, mostly during the season, scouts are on the road visiting schools, getting insight from, coaches, teammates, stuff like that. They are going to games, they're going to practices, they're checking in on these guys, looking who, they think their team might be interested in for their area. Once the season's over is when they really start to get into like heavy tape evaluation because a lot of GMs and a lot of scouts like to be able to look at a lot of tape all at one time for one player so they can kind of see, okay, here's the progression of how he did throughout the season. And they know the context of the injuries, when a guy might've been playing hurt, whatever, like all this other stuff. So that's when the tape evaluation really starts is like right now. So it makes me think that whoever they're going to get in place, they're going to get them in place pretty quickly. And whether Cowden is kind of the man in charge for the rest of the season, and then they're going to put Stryker in or whatever, or if they're, or whatever this is going to look like, I think it's going to happen pretty fast. Like as far as interviews, hiring process, all that stuff. I don't know if they'll have a hire before the season ends necessarily, but I think it'll be like the minute the season ends, the hire is announced. Like, if it doesn't happen during the season, because there's nothing to say that they couldn't make the move during the season. It doesn't change anything for this year, really. All it does is expedite the process of getting that guy into that seat and having them be able to mold the scouting process for this upcoming draft class. Because this upcoming draft class is huge for this team. I mean, they desperately need to refill the coffers at several positions. They need to get younger at a lot of spots. And obviously fully rebuild the offensive line. So they need to have a great draft class, and it's obviously a little bit more difficult to do when you don't have the GM that's been running this thing for years and years, directing his scouts that he hired and things like that. So I'm very interested to see how quickly they get somebody in place. And then also, and this has been brought up in the chat a few times, do they go to like more of an analytics approach? Like this is something that we have griped about with Jon Robinson.
Yeah, I mean, is that Jon Robinson? Because Jon Robinson, I think, has been more vocal in his stance about analytics, right? Like how he views analytics. But it's also, to me, do they start modernizing stuff a little bit now? Like, did Mike Vrabel realize? Because Mike Vrabel's comments about passer rating, winning the trenches, and limiting turnovers in the run game and stuff, like that's how you win games, right? And he goes, if you go and look, that's how you've won games for the last 25 years. That seems a little data driven, right? That they've realized that they win games when this stuff happens. But you also want a modern approach. And we've always said that we think Vrabel is the guy that is establishing the modern approach or the offensive philosophy. What are the chances that analytics or that changes? Like in my mind, I almost think that it kind of maybe changes it a little, but not enough that you're going to be able to tell a shit ton of difference on the field or something. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, I mean, I guess I would be interested to see kind of like how this plays out, like whether, because I don't know that Vrabel is a super analytics, guy that he's just all in on, models and stuff like that. I think he is a little bit old school in the fact that, he feels like, some of the older ways of thinking about things are the way to build a football team versus the modern, ultra modern analytical approaches. But I do think to some degree that the way that the Titans have chosen to build this team and have chosen to kind of structure the way they play football with the offense and the defense and everything. I kind of think that it is largely due to who they have. I mean, like, if you don't have a Mahomes, if you don't have a Herbert, and I've talked about this for years, if you don't have a Josh Allen, it's really hard to just be like this drop back and throw it 45 times a game team and succeed at the NFL level, because what you're going to end up having is a bunch of turnovers, a bunch of sacks, a bunch of negative plays. And, unfortunately, that's kind of the hand that they've been dealt. And unless they can fall into a franchise quarterback or, whoever, or a higher level quarterback. And I'm not taking a shot at Tannehill. And I think everyone knows my position on this if you watch the show. Tannehill is a good quarterback. He's not a great quarterback. They've
already signed someone, by the way. They've signed cornerback John Reed. A cornerback, of course, because, fuck left tackle, right? Yeah. John Reed to their 53-man roster off the Falcons practice squad per source, among the first moves for interim GM Ryan Cowden. So Ryan Cowden's first move is not to go for the Texans, not to go for the Patriots. It's to go over to little brother over at the Falcons and pick up a guy.
Well, he, honestly, that's probably not great news for Christian Fulton's injury. Is my first thought there. But, interesting either way, I guess. I mean, it's not a earth-shattering move there.
Let me ask you this. Mike Vrabel's typically the top 10 on when to go for it and everything, his fourth down decision-making, which would lend you to believe that maybe he doesn't know he's using analytics, but he has an analytical mind, right? Yes. I don't know if it's that stretch in his mind.
Stretch.
So if that stretch in his mind and Stretch becomes GM, don't you think there's going to be a little bit more emphasis on analytics?
Yeah, so I've
talked myself into Stretch, by the way. A span of 30 fucking minutes, I am all in on Stretch as GM, and if he's not GM, I'm going to be so fucking disappointed.
That is the other thing on Stretch, is that it has been reported that he is the guy that is in Vrabel's headset giving him percentages in go, no-go situations, which Vrabel has been very good at, especially this year. So, and like Stretch has also been credited for a lot of the stuff where, Vrabel obviously knows the rule book really well, but manipulating the clock and things like that, all these little things that they do, that's kind of Stretch's area of expertise, it seems like. So I don't know how much you want to take him out of that role or whatever, but I do think he's kind of a guy that would be he'd be a very risky pick, just the fact that he's never been in NFL scouting department or NFL personnel department. But I mean, he would certainly be an interesting pick. I wouldn't totally rule it out. I'm just saying.
Okay, so let me ask you this, because I know we got to still talk about the Jaguars. We got to talk about fan reaction. But tonight at 6:30 p.m. Central Standard Time, if you need to be listening to this, Mike, and everybody else needs to be listening to this, on Channel 2 is the Mike Vrabel Show. Will this be the highest rated Mike Vrabel show ever? Because I am tuning in. Be the first time I've ever tuned into this. Will this be the highest Mike Vrabel show ever?
Oh man, it should be. I mean,
if they still have it, I haven't checked to see if they canceled it or anything. But
I can imagine. I would bet that Vrabel would be very, very diplomatic, and he will probably tell. Is it Mike Keith that does it with him? I know
it's either him or Amy. It's Amy Wells. Amy Wells.
It's Amy Wells. Okay. I would imagine he probably tells Amy Wells, you get one Jon Robinson question, I will make one statement, and then if you ask him about him again, I'm throwing you off the set.
I'm going to body slam you. I'm going to hit you with the spine buster, pop-up power bomb. It
There's
is
no
live, by the
chance.
way, Andrew. It's live at 6:30 p.m. Just crazy. I thought about that while you were talking. I was like, wait a minute, I think the Mike Vrabel show is on tonight.
That
Okay,
is
so
correct.
stretch for GM, but that's table to the offseason. Here's where we're at. The Tennessee Titans have an embarrassing loss to the Philadelphia Eagles. Titans Twitter, of course, goes full on boo-hoo fucking meltdown and thinks this team is going to lose to the Jaguars this week, which is utterly ridiculous because the Titans are going to sweep. You heard it here first. The Titans are going to sweep the Jaguars, finish out their sweep of the AFC South against the Texans at the end of the year. They're going to lose to the Cowboys and beat the Chargers. And right now, I don't know how much influence Jon Robinson has had or how much the presence of Jon Robinson or the tension between Mike Vrabel and Jon Robinson has affected the locker room. But this past Sunday, Mike Vrabel had this comment to say about the team being at a crossroads.
Well, I mean, I think we're at a crossroads. I told the team I think we're at a crossroads and kind of how we, want to continue down this season. And we can't point fingers. We have to assume that each and every one of us didn't do a good enough job because we didn't. We have to come to work with greater energy and greater resolve to prepare to win a football game against a division opponent. And it sucks losing. It sucks getting beat the way we did. But we have to, we got to make a decision. How much are we willing to invest and trust in what the coaches are doing, trust in what each and other players are doing. So I think it's a critical time for us.
Come to Jesus meeting is pretty much what I heard for the locker room off of the Eagles' embarrassing loss. Because we talked about it on our podcast that we dismissed, but we kind of felt like at some point the team just kind of like knew they were not in this game and not going to win. That's kind of how I felt. Now, I still think this team was what it's always been. It's going to win games, whether more than likely close games that are going to drive you fucking nuts against mediocre to very bad teams, and they're going to lose against good teams. However, firings sometimes light a fire under certain players' asses, and maybe certain players that thought they were safe in a Jon Robinson regime may not be so safe anymore. You could see, because I find it a little interesting that LaRaven Clark's name got mentioned on Monday's press conference about competing with Dennis Daly, who Jon Robinson traded a 5th-round pick for, which I think is still the worst trade of the offseason. You can't convince me otherwise. So, in that sense, now Mike Vrabel mentions LaRaven Clark's competing. Well, maybe Jon Robinson didn't like that, and that also was a little source of contention. I don't know. But players that maybe had thought they were safe are now going to have a fire under their ass. A team who just got their general manager fired for their performance and not living up to his expectations he set on them by either drafting or signing them, now has a fire lit under their ass. Mike Vrabel probably is pissed off for greatness right now as much as this team is. I think this could be the biggest winning margin for the Tennessee Titans this weekend. And I don't really feel bad for the Jaguars, but I feel bad for anybody that has to face this team going forward because they are going to be pissed off.
Yeah, I could see that. I would feel better about that if if I felt confident Treylon Burks was going to play, but I'm guessing he probably won't. Which means they still end up in the box that Jon Robinson has built for them and that he ultimately got fired for building, which is an offensive line that can't run block well enough to get Derrick Henry going and receivers who can't get open and catch the football. So I worry a little bit about that. Now, that being said, Jaguars defense is bad. They certainly aren't nearly what the Eagles are or, even the Bengals. So I think the Titans will win this game. I don't know. I'm not expecting a blowout just because I feel like this team cannot score more than 24 points. Like that is about like their cap. Or I guess 27. That's what they scored in Green Bay, right? Like, so I think 27 might be the cap. So yeah, maybe it's a 27-10, like, which I guess would be a blowout. But I don't know. I'd struggle to see a blowout without Treylon Burks.
You don't think that maybe this team just comes out in a totally different, re-energized state and they're renewed vigor? Because I'm so interested to see what this team looks like, not only from a personnel standpoint, as far as, you know, who gets the nod at the start. I'm interested to see, just because we talked about, well, it's Mike Vrabel's team, it's Mike Vrabel's decision, Mike Vrabel's, but how much is pressure from Jon Robinson, or saying that you got to play this guy because we did this, like we got to do this because we did that. I don't know. I don't think that there's a high chance of that, but I think when you leave the possibility of that being the case, it makes this game a lot more interesting.
Yeah, I mean, it will be interesting. Like, you know, hey, is LaRaven Clark suddenly the left tackle? You know, do they have like some different guys in there at certain spots? It'll be interesting to kind of track some of that stuff. But I don't know. I'm so much. I feel like this move today has shaken the snow globe so much that's just like, yes, this game Sunday is exciting to some degree because, like, it is basically, for all intents and purposes, it's a chance to clinch the division. They won't technically clinch it with a win. They would knock the Jaguars out of it, but they would have to wait for the Colts to lose one more game or to, you know, beat the Chargers the next week to fully clinch. But I just can't help but think about the offseason now. Like, I'm just sitting here going like,
because you know that this firing doesn't change the outcome of the team as far as expectations for a Super Bowl this year. No. But now you're thinking, well, you know, could Todd Downing still keep his job? What if he doesn't? And then you bring in Tim Kelly, and maybe it's Tim Kelly, Rick Smith, and Mike Vrabel, and, you know, just, you know, going crazy on offense this year. You know, what if they decide to trade away assets and then trade up for stuff? It's like, yeah, the Jaguars game, they'll probably beat them and whatever. They're probably going to go 4-1 down the stretch. But what is this? Like, it's hard for me to focus.
Yeah, it really is. It's hard for me to stay on task here talking about the Jaguars.
Yeah, because I go back to Jon Robinson.
Yeah, it all comes back to him today. And let me say this about Jon Robinson too, you know, before we like wrap things up. Robinson, like, to me, the Jon Robinson era was successful. Like, and I'll write about this a little bit more in depth for PK's site this week, but or I guess it'll be up either tonight or in the morning. But to me, it was a success. Like, he inherited a team, like, you know, we've all been over this a million times, but 5-27 the previous 2 seasons before he arrived. They've rattled off 6 straight winning seasons since. You know, he's 20 plus games over 500 as a GM. He was absolutely a success, but he either got stale or capped out where he was able to take this team. They just were not, like, they are not talented enough. That is ultimately what you very clearly see when they play these teams like the Chiefs and the Bills and the Bengals and all these other teams that they are competing with at this point.
We had talked about this a couple of weeks ago, or a couple of years ago. We talked about, I think I called it the hubris pod or something. Like, I talked about Jon Robinson's hubris, like, throughout the whole episode, because I was just like, the gall to, you know, only do these moves and to just stay the status quo, to be okay with Jeff Swaim, Anthony Ferkser, and Tommy Hudson, whoever else was the tight end last year. Like, there was a lot of overvaluing losers. Like, Jeff Swaim is a Jon Robinson thing, right? Like, that is a Jon Robinson guy. Mason Kinsey, Jon Robinson guy. All the players that you hate, Dennis Daly, Jeff Swaim, Cody Hollister, those are Jon Robinson guys. Aaron Brewer, Jon Robinson guy. Like, and you can say what you want about Aaron Brewer's future as a center or something, but ultimately, Jon Robinson said, Mike Vrabel, you can make Aaron Brewer work. I have faith in Aaron Brewer, and I have faith in you. I'm not getting you a left guard. Like, that is the thing. All the players that everybody hates, they're probably gone. God, I hope they're fucking gone. Maybe Aaron Brewer can stick around. I don't have a problem with Aaron Brewer as a backup. But I think a lot of these guys are going to be fucking gone.
Yeah. Let me ask you this. Best GM in Titans franchise history, is it Jon Robinson or Floyd Reese?
Oh, Jon Robinson, hands down.
Yeah,
not even close.
I would agree with that. Now, Floyd Reese got more years.
Yeah.
He had 13 years with the franchise. Robinson only had 7.
And he ran that franchise into the ground. He locked Steve McNair out of the building. He let Steve McNair and Derek Mason go to the Ravens. He got him
and
the team. Yeah, he got the team put in cap hell.
Yeah.
At least Amay Adams Strunk had the foresight, unlike Bud Adams, to get out now before letting him continue to run up close to the cap for no rewards, right? Like, he's risking all this money, and they're just continuing to land in the same place, which is win the division. Whoop-de-doo. That's great, because you got to win the division to get in the playoffs, but you can't compete with anybody in the playoffs almost.
Yeah, it's kind of funny if you look at Floyd Reese's tenure. It almost looks very similar to Robinson's. Like, he takes over a bad team, they get to mediocre, then they surge and become a playoff team and contend for a little bit, and then things just get stale and kind of die off. Mm-hmm. And it's kind of the same cycle. It just happened a little bit faster with Robinson. Frankly, Robinson had a much better winning percentage than Floyd Reese over the course of his career. So it's just one of those things. I just want to say, like, on this day, that while we are all talking about Robinson's failures, which ultimately led to his firing, and they are real, and they are, I personally thought he'd get another year, and I thought it would have been okay if he'd gotten another year. But I don't have a huge problem with them firing him. And frankly, if this was Vrabel at all, if Vrabel was saying, hey, I've got to have something else. It's
me or something, him, or it's him or Ohio State or, right.
If that was part of this, then absolutely Amay Adams Strunk made the right decision. Because I was telling people when they were asking about it, last week when the Ohio State stuff came out from that Rex Road piece, I was like, well, if it comes down to it, if someone has to go between Robinson and Vrabel, it has got to be Robinson. You absolutely cannot let Vrabel outside of this franchise. He is the most valuable member of the franchise. You can't let him go no matter what. And so I think that probably, whether there was an ultimatum or not, we'll probably never know, but they made the right choice in choosing Vrabel, which I do think this is a choice for Vrabel. And I would be shocked if he doesn't end up with veto power over the new general manager. So,
I think that's okay. You don't want Vrabel being the main scout or being the main negotiator or something. You just want him and he probably wants this too, to have the control that he needs to make sure that he knows I can work with a lot, but why don't you get me really good players and let me work with them, and we're going to have a Super Bowl team. And here's what I need to get to a Super Bowl team. I needed A.J. Brown, and A.J. Brown's gone. And now Jeffrey Simmons is that tenuous situation. And now this may to me, this is a sign that this is going to get wrapped up quickly. Like this is not going to be a lingering all the way into the season kind of deal. Jeffrey Simmons is going to get wrapped up here soon. I mean, I'm not talking like in a week or so, but sooner rather than later.
I would imagine he'll be signed to an extension this offseason. And this should also put to rest any of the Titans are so tight on money that they can't afford to do Jeffrey Simmons extension because of the stadium stuff. They just extended Jon Robinson. He had 4 years left on his deal. They've got to pay out all those 4 years. This is not the cheap decision. Like this is going to cost them probably upwards of 20-something million, $30 million, and now they're going to have to go pay a new general manager, regardless of who they hire. So this is clear, they have money to spend on whatever they need to make this team better. And it's a declaration from Amay Adams Strunk that we're going for it. We are going to push the envelope, and we're going to try to win a Super Bowl here in Tennessee. And that's great. That should be celebrated by the fan base.
Yeah. Yeah. Great owner, great coach. And I thought and I still do, we had a top tier GM, but I am okay with getting rid of a top tier GM because you don't think his performance has been up to snuff, which it technically hasn't in recent years. And you want to be better. Like we talk shit about the Colts and Chris Ballard all the time. And he has made more egregious mistakes that are setting the Colts back than Jon Robinson has setting the Titans back. Now, I want Chris Ballard to stay employed, mind you. But isn't it nice to have an owner that says, we're pretty great, but we could be better. And the way we're going to get better is we are going to have to fire our GM, who has done us really well, but who has flatlined and has grown stale. Instead of letting Jeff Fisher coach here for 20 years when it's not working anymore, you got to cut it off now, and you got to cut it off early so you can get a head start on whatever you need to do so you're not falling behind in the offseason. Remember when they fired Jeff Fisher and then Mike Munchak is hired in I don't know, March or April or something. It was wild how late they waited to hire him. So I'm all in on the decision. I am shocked. I am surprised, but I'm not sad. I mean, I hate that someone lost their job, but I'm not sad. I'm tentatively excited, scary, but I understand it. It's a logical decision. And it seems the only person to think that it's not a logical decision is right now Jared Stillman, who says that Jon Robinson should not have been fired, which I think is crazy because all he does is complain about every player that Jon Robinson has ever drafted and thinks his team stinks. So,
Absolutely.
All right, that will do it for us. Do you have any last words?
Last words. I would say that Vrabel getting control of the roster, at least veto power, to me is a good thing. I think that'll help this team make sure that it is on the same wavelength. And there's a lot of teams around the NFL that do it that way. It's not, I know everyone will point to Bill O'Brien and the Texans disaster, but this does not have to be that way where he is the GM and in charge of everything. I think there will be a GM in place, and I think Vrabel will be over that GM or holding the final veto. And I think that's a fine setup, and I think that may be the best setup for them. So I think that's a good way to go. And I don't know, it's an exciting move in a way, and it is sad. I will echo what you said as far as there's no doubt Jon Robinson cared a lot about this franchise, really wanted to do a good job and did a good job for a lot of his tenure here. And I, obviously wish him nothing but the best moving forward, but hopefully they find someone better and stop drafting Isaiah Wilsons and Caleb Farley's.
Stephen Holder on Twitter writes, famous Colts sucker offer. The timing of this Jon Robinson firing doesn't make sense. I'm skeptical. I don't know if he's skeptical that he thinks the firing is fake and it's a WWE plot line or there's a M. Night Shyamalan twist hanging around the corner, or if he's just skeptical that there's maybe more to the story than what we're hearing. But, if instead of writing that tweet, if I'm a Colts beat writer, I should be writing, you can see that Jon Robinson's not settled, or the Titans don't settle for mediocrity and have fired their GM that's better than our GM, but, Chris Ballard's still employed.
Absolutely.
That will do it. Yeah, I had to get some Colts slander in it.
One last word. We always got to thank Jon Robinson for bringing us Mike Vrabel because he did that, and ultimately that sets the Titans up.
And Amay Adams Strunk, Amay Adams Strunk got Jon Robinson. Amay Adams Strunk and Jon Robinson got Mike Vrabel. Now it's time for Amay Adams Strunk and Mike Vrabel to take us into the next era of Titans football, because that's technically what this is going to kind of be, is the new era of Titans football, because we have no clue what's going to happen.
Absolutely.
For Mike Herndon, you can follow him on Twitter at Mike Herndon NFL. And you can listen to this podcast in podcast form if you're just caught the tail end or missed a few of it. It'll be on shortly after this, and it'll also be, the full video will be on YouTube. You can follow him on Twitter at Mike Herndon NFL. On Wednesday, he will have his rewritten ×5. I'm assuming you've gone through 5 drafts now from between Sunday and here for paulkarski.com, your article. Especially with this news of Jon Robinson probably having to pivot everything. You also have the Mike Herndon Show on Thursday for Broadway Insiders. You can make sure to check that out. That's for Broadway Insiders only. If you don't have an insider pass, go to BroadwaySportsMedia.com. There will also be the Music City Audible is out today. The Music City Audible is also going to be out on Thursday as well. That's Justin and Justin, presented by Pharmacy. We're presented by Jaspers. You need to head down there for 2 for 1 on Sundays. Watch the Titans beat the shit out of the Jacksonville Jaguars in Titans fashion. Like, they're going to beat them like 19-10. It's going to be very unsexy, but it's going to be great. So go to Jaspers, watch that. They have a good brunch menu, TVs everywhere. It's awesome. I encourage you to go. I will also be on a football show on Thursday, 1 p.m. Central Standard Time with Braden Gall. Well, we'll have to dive into this a little bit more, and we'll also be talking Jaguars. We'll also be talking a little bit of college football talk. That's 1 p.m. Central Standard Time. And follow at 440 Sports and all notifications. For Mike Herndon, my name is Zach Lyons. Follow me on Twitter at FWordsPod. This has been Football and Other F-Words. And you have just been effed live.